early morning swim. He had gone out to the coastline just before sunrise, and a little after sunrise, got into the water. Not too many details about what exactly happened once he was in the water, but authorities did end up finding his body actually hundreds of yards away down the shoreline. His body was discovered in a rocky cove. It was brushed up against that.
What if Malcolm Jamal Warner's departure from this world wasn't an accident in the waves, but a meticulously choreographed removal ordered by Hollywood's most guarded power circle? That's the question Pamela Warner, his mother, has been chasing ever since her own quiet life was upended by a dossier that, if real, could rock the foundations of the entertainment industry. We've seen countless stories about suspicious passings, but what she stumbled upon, blueprints for something whispered about only in the darkest corners of backlot corridors, was not a drowning report or a conspiracy blog. It was a corporate schematic for what insiders have nicknamed the silence machine, a step-by-step apparatus not of steel or wires, but of policy, favors, and ruinous leverage, designed to smother inconvenient voices before they could speak. In this telling, Malcolm wasn't just an actor with a celebrated past. He was the wrong man to defy the wrong people.
Look, I enjoyed everything there was to enjoy about growing up on television, but there was a responsibility because I had a head on my shoulders and I was around other people who had head on their shoulders. So that access didn't really come down my path because I wasn't around.
Pamela's friends say she had been warned to stop digging. They hint at anonymous calls, strange cars idling too long outside her street in LA, people who smiled in daylight but never met her eyes. And still, she pressed on, because the files she'd seen didn't just name Malcolm. It outlined how the same system could be redeployed at will, targeting anyone whose loyalty was in doubt. This was bigger than her son, bigger than one case. In an industry where everyone is replaceable, Pamela had tripped over the manual for disposal. And the most chilling part, the alleged architects weren't nameless. Bill Cosby's shadow loomed over the documents, not as the sole mastermind, but as a figure tangled in a network whose reach went far beyond any sitcom soundstage. Those who knew Malcolm best describe him as principled to a fault. Not just polite refusals in the face of questionable requests, but outright rejection of certain gatherings and tests that, according to multiple veteran crew members, functioned as initiations. Off the record, two separate former studio employees described candlelit rooms, coded phrases, and ritualized scenes that were more about leverage than belief. Keep the footage, keep the secrets. Warner, they claim, sidestepped it all. He worked, he performed, he collected his paychecks, but he never let them pull him into the inner circle. And in a world where power brokers feed on compliance, that made him not just an outsider, but a liability. Imagine refusing entry to a game where the stakes are careers, reputations, and decades of hush. Imagine being the man who walked away with eyes open.
This is what happens when you put too much attention on the negative than the positive.
The unspoken rule in Hollywood's hidden network is simple. Those who decline must either be brought back into the fold or neutralized. History has given us chilling parallels. Actors who conveniently vanished from marquee lists after sudden scandals, musicians whose accidental misfortunes mirrored whispered disputes with the wrong producer, models whose names now exist only in grainy gossip page archives. In that light, Malcolm's passing feels less like a random tragedy and more like a calculated page torn from the same script. We don't have to stretch far to recall similar questions asked after the sudden ends of other celebrated but non-compliant talents. Different decades, different headlines, same unnerving pattern.
So there are new details in the tragic passing of Malcolm Jamal Warner. Yesterday, NVU asked me about the second person who was left in critical condition from this incident as well, from Malcolm's drowning incident. So People magazine is exclusively reporting that the second person who was taken by ambulance to the hospital and was in critical condition was actually a person not related to Malcolm Jamal Warner, but it was a person that was there.
And then there's the second swimmer. Official reports make it sound noble, a 29-year-old man from Nicaragua who entered the water to try to help Warner when the current swept him away. He survived. He was hospitalized, in critical condition, treated, and released. But beyond that, silence. No photo, no interview, no background. In an age when anyone can be found with a few taps on a phone, the absence of public identity is almost louder than the facts we have. Could he have been more than a bystander, someone placed there for reasons not in the police file? Or was he a wild card the system hadn't accounted for, a living witness to something meant to leave no witnesses at all? In whispered industry speculation, his anonymity isn't just curious, it's strategic. We've been here before in different forms. Natalie Wood's fateful night at sea still inspires theories about hidden arguments and missing minutes. Heath Ledger's departure raised eyebrows among those who knew the pressures mounting behind his final performances. The common thread is not proof, but patterns. Recurrent shadows at the edge of the spotlight, where official narratives are neat and human behavior never is. In Malcolm's case, the timing is as suspect as the setting, a career that had just pivoted into a personal podcast project, a family vacation meant to be restorative, and then, without warning, a chain of events that ends on a shoreline with 2 men in the water and only one walking away.
Is that this was one of the most challenging, it's known as one of the most challenging beaches because it's a beach known for local surfers. So they did have signs in English and Spanish warning of danger of drowning and other things, but there were no guards there at the time.
What lingers is the question of benefit. The silence machine, as described in Pamela's files, isn't just about punishment, it's about prevention. Removing a voice before it can amplify discontent, before it can point to the strings and name the puppeteers. Warner, with his reputation for thoughtfulness, his refusal to traffic in scandal, his distance from the spectacle that engulfed Cosby, he was the kind of man whose word could cut through noise if he chose to speak. And if he ever did, whose names might have followed, what deals would have collapsed, which carefully maintained legends would have shattered in public view. By the time the surf settled in Costa Rica, the official story was already written. A powerful current, a failed rescue, a life cut short. But outside the press briefings, we hear a different undertone. It's in the guarded phrases from longtime collaborators, in the way certain people who usually rush to mourn in public kept their tributes oddly brief, in the stray comment from a retired director about old debts and forgotten favors. When we line those fragments up beside the vanishing act of the second swimmer and the blueprint for enforced silence, the picture that forms is not the one in the headlines. It's colder, more deliberate, and it suggests that what happened to Malcolm Jamal Warner was less about the ocean that day and more about the currents he refused to swim with.
Know that this incident took place on Sunday in Costa Rica. He was on a family vacation. He was swimming off of the coast of a town called K1ll in the province of Limon. He was swimming at Playa Grande. I mean, I've visited Costa Rica a few times. I was there with my family a few years ago, and those currents can be...
It's impossible to look at Malcolm's final hours without noticing how comfortably they slide into a far older pattern. The water has always been Hollywood's most discreet accomplice. We've seen it before. Natalie Wood on a yacht in the dark, Whitney Houston in a hotel bathtub, a string of lesser-known names pulled from pools and coastlines with the same polished statements about currents, exhaustion, or tragic mishap. Each time, the evidence dissolves in the very medium that took them. No fingerprints, no clear timeline, no angles for forensic reconstruction. A former maritime investigator once told us that open water is the cleanest canvas for a staged exit. And the chilling part is how right that feels when we map these cases side by side. Malcolm's place in that list isn't random, it's precise. It suggests not an accident, but a formula perfected over decades, honed to leave families grieving and reporters quoting a coroner instead of a witness.
Oh, so unbelievable there. And Branson, I also was reading that just days ago, he had another podcast episode that was dropped, and now a lot of fans are starting to really listen to that as maybe one of his last times that you hear him.
And when we dig deeper, we see that in every one of those high-profile aquatic endings, the person lost was on the cusp of a shift, a new project, a new disclosure, a refusal to play ball with whatever was being demanded behind closed doors. Malcolm had just carved out his own platform, a podcast he owned, content he controlled, an audience that tuned in not because of a studio's marketing plan, but because they trusted his voice. Not all Hood was packaged as a conversation about identity, culture, and community. But listen closely, and there's another rhythm under the words, a nod to unseen pressures, casual remarks about the cost of telling the truth. Once, during a discussion about media portrayals, he spoke about the stories that get buried because the storyteller is gone. It played like metaphor at the time. Now, it sounds like a breadcrumb.
I wanted to remind you, as I remind myself, that no matter what's going on, there's always a reason to smile. Like if you just take a minute to stop and take stock, I guarantee you can find at least one reason to smile. And if for some reason you can't find a reason to smile, then that's probably the best time to be the reason for somebody else.
Those who knew him say Malcolm was strategic with his language. He had a way of tucking double meanings into easy banter, of letting a sentence work two ways at once. In a June episode, while breaking down the influence of the entertainment industry on Black narratives, he joked about the gatekeepers in the high towers and what happens when you knock too loud on their doors. For casual listeners, it was commentary. For anyone who'd heard whispers about the silence machine, it was a flare. Was this his way of planting warnings in plain sight, or was he simply unable to keep certain truths from bleeding into his public work? Either way, the timing is impossible to ignore. Weeks later, the ocean swallows him, and the second person who might have been able to tell us more disappears into anonymity. For decades, Bill Cosby had loomed large in Malcolm's professional and personal life, a figure who had once been the gatekeeper to his biggest opportunity and the architect of his earliest success. To the public, their bond was almost paternal, forged in the long hours of sitcom tapings and cemented by the way Cosby championed Malcolm's talents on and off the set. But behind that image, there were whispers of a more complicated dynamic, one built on loyalty that was expected to be absolute. In the tight-knit hierarchy of a network juggernaut, favor from the top was both a blessing and a binding contract. And Malcolm had spent years navigating that unspoken debt.
I mean, when I was on the show and we had such good times together, I was probably 18 and Malcolm was probably 17, 16, I don't know. And we would take walks together, all of us, and pick up food, talk, played basketball, hung out on the weekends, went to parties together. He was so good.
As Cosby's own reputation began to unravel in later years, Malcolm found himself caught in the undertow. His reluctance to publicly condemn or defend the man was read in different ways by different audiences. Some saw it as prudence, others as quiet allegiance. In Hollywood's inner corridors, however, the ambiguity was a dangerous stance. Remaining neutral in a battle that had fractured alliances meant he was neither fully inside nor fully outside the circle. And when someone like Cosby, with decades of influence and a network of loyalists, still held sway in certain rooms, that middle ground could be a perilous place to stand.
I think for a lot of kids who just kind of go wayward and go off the wrong path, it's usually because the parents are not parenting, right? So if the kid is, and a lot of times the parents are living vicariously through the kid. So if the parent has gone Hollywood, then there's no one there to give the kid direction. So
there are those who believe Cosby's reach extended far beyond his public fall from grace. Connections built over decades don't dissolve overnight. They simply retreat into less visible channels. Industry veterans point out that many who owed their careers to Cosby still occupy powerful positions, and they operate with the same discretion that kept their mentor untouchable for so long. If Malcolm was preparing to speak more openly about industry power structures, and by extension about the man who had once been his most important advocate, that could have been interpreted not as an act of independence, but as betrayal.
That no matter what happens, that they love me. Like even if I was getting into trouble for something that I did, it was still paramount that they love me. They may be disappointed in me, they may be angry with me, frustrated with me. They're giving me these consequences.
The emotional weight of such a rupture can't be overstated. For Malcolm, Cosby was not just a colleague, but a formative influence, someone who had helped shape his identity as an artist. To turn away from that legacy, or even to acknowledge its darker corners, meant dismantling part of his own foundation. And for Cosby, a public challenge from one of his most famous protégés would have carried a symbolic sting, proof that his authority could be defied by those he had once groomed. In a world obsessed with control, symbols matter as much as secrets. Speculation grows darker when we consider how calculated retribution can be in elite circles. Actions are rarely impulsive, they are orchestrated to send a message without leaving fingerprints. If Cosby or his loyal network perceived Malcolm's evolving platform as a threat, the solution would not have been an open confrontation. It would have been something quieter, something that could be passed off as misfortune, but would still echo loudly enough to deter others from following his path. In that light, the drowning begins to look less like a freak occurrence and more like a signature move from a master of image management.
I hate to bring up the sad news, but news did break today of the untimely passing of Malcolm Jamal Warner.
I can't believe it.
This possibility reframes their entire relationship, turning a decades-long mentorship into the backdrop for a tragedy driven by control, secrecy, and the fear of exposure. It's the kind of betrayal that stings twice, first in the act itself, and then in the realization that the hand guiding you all those years might also have been the one pushing you toward the edge. And if that's true, Malcolm's passing isn't just the loss of a beloved figure. It's the final, ruthless chapter in a power play that began the moment a young actor first stepped onto a soundstage under Cosby's watchful eye.
True that he got up for an early morning swim? That's what it was?
So, yes, there are reports that he got up for an early morning swim and that this happened right after sunrise.
Listen, if you go on vacation, to these Caribbean islands, like that's what I like to do. Get up early in the morning and go jump in the water early. Solo.
I do it all the time.
Yeah,
that's what I would do. I get up before the kids get up or before the wife gets up, and I would go swim. I'm a swimmer, so I would go swim.
We've also heard from 2 independent producers who were approached to work on the next season of Not All Hood. According to them, Malcolm planned to expand into investigative episodes, stepping outside cultural commentary to examine industry power plays and the manipulation of Black artistry. One source claims he wanted to tackle how fame can be weaponized to silence dissent. Another said there was talk of an episode centered on contracts that lock your tongue for life. These aren't light topics for a man still deeply tied to colleagues in that very ecosystem. If those plans were real, then his platform wasn't just a conversation piece. It was a countdown. It's worth noting how quickly the podcast promotional momentum stalled after his passing. Scheduled episodes quietly pulled, social media pages shifting from promotion to memorial. The kind of rapid pivot that can be explained as grief, but in certain circles gets read as containment. We've seen similar pivots after other untimely passings. Digital archives vanishing, works in progress locked away out of respect, never to surface again. In the world of controlled narratives, even the voice of someone gone can be scrubbed clean before it ever reaches the public ear.
They mentioned that they do typically patrol the area because of how crazy the currents and the water gets in that area, but that Sunday specifically, they did not patrol the area, but they have put out people and different officials in the area and other surrounding areas, and they upped their warnings following this. But they did send a rest in peace, and I guess just wanted to send some kind words, but wanted to explain.
The drowning pattern and the podcast breadcrumbs aren't 2 separate threads. They braid together into something far more alarming. We have a method that eliminates a person without leaving a crime scene, and a motive tied to shutting down a platform that might expose inconvenient truths. This is where speculation stops being a pastime and starts feeling like a warning, because if a man with Malcolm's reputation, legacy, and connections can be removed from the board so quietly, then the rest of us, without his visibility or influence, are even more vulnerable.
Are wondering why weren't there any guards or patrol or anything on the beach as well, and why bystanders, people who aren't like official lifeguards, had to get involved. So there was a report by TMZ that there were no lifeguards on duty. Actually, there's a group called the Caribbean Guard, and this is a group of lifeguards and people who patrol beaches. They released a statement yesterday. They say, "We deeply regret the passing of Malcolm Jamal."
And so we're left with a choice: accept the official version, neat and final, or start asking the questions that make people shift uncomfortably in their seats. The water is patient, the machine is precise. And somewhere between the two, a voice we trusted is no longer here to speak for itself. Do you believe Malcolm Jamal Warner's end was just an accident? Or is it time for the truth to finally come to light? Until next time, stay sharp, stay questioning, and don't let the tide take your voice.